to another episode of Presley Mania. My name is Rhonda, and today we are continuing on with part 2 of Elvis and Priscilla's divorce documents. As I told you last week, that these documents are not the 14 that you would normally get from a quick internet search, nor are they the same ones that were auctioned off. No, these are the whole thing. Every jot, every tittle, every cross T, every dotted I is in these documents. There are things that people have wondered about for years. Absolutely years. Where were the missing pages? What was in those missing pages? Well, I have them, and I want to go over them with you guys. We ended last week talking about a default judgment that was entered against Priscilla. That's where we're going to pick up today. We also went over the property settlement agreement and the marital termination agreement. I will be referencing some of that in this video. So if you have not seen last week's video, I highly suggest you go back and watch it, because otherwise some of this stuff you may feel a bit in the dark on. So watch that video, come back and watch this video, and you will be all up to date and ready to rock and roll on the Elvis and Priscilla divorce saga.
3, 2, 1.
Okay, like I said, we left off with Priscilla being served as being in default. So we take up today, she has, at this point, as of May 29th, 1973, it's when this was filed in the Superior Court of the State of California for the County of Los Angeles, she has secured an attorney, and that attorney's name was Arthur Toll. Let's talk a little bit about Arthur Toll. He passed away on August 28th of 2016. His obituary states that he represented Priscilla Presley and Cher. That was in his obituary. He was actually suspended from practicing law on November 22nd of 1974. And let me tell you a little bit about why. He was suspended for findings that he participated in making bribes in connection with obtaining a zoning change, and he engaged in other dishonest conduct in an attempt to thwart investigations of those bribes. And so as a result of those actions, it was ordered that he would be suspended from practicing law for a period of 3 years, and also that he be put on probation for the 3-year period, up on condition that for the first year of the probationary period, he shall be suspended from practice of law. So he had a shady past, but this is who Priscilla decided to go with, and this is her lawyer, and there is a lot of speculation as to how he was able to represent her, because a lot of these charges had been filed prior to her securing him, but maybe it's because that it wasn't until 74 that he was actually suspended. So if there were things that went on after that, which I think there were, my question is, how was it legal? I'm not a lawyer, I can't answer that, but let's move on down the line. He filed this order that Priscilla was to appear in court on June 8th of 1973, and she was going to petition the court that they remove the charge for default against her. And the reason she wanted that removed was because she was planning on taking Elvis back to court for a substantial amount of money. She claims that the reason that she defaulted was because she had believed everything that she had been told and was ready for the divorce to go through exactly as it was. But she says that the grounds for that said default was procured by extrinsic fraud. So that's what she's accusing Elvis and his attorneys of. Okay? All right, let's skip on over. And I wanted to start with what her lawyer had to say, the facts that he presented in this case as to why he felt like they should accept this motion and let the default be removed from Priscilla. So we're just going to read just a little bit about this because I want to get into the deposition that Priscilla gave to Arthur Toll, because there's some stuff in there, and when I start it, you're going to see what I'm talking about. Okay, so he's moving the court that they get rid of this default, and he goes into lots of detail. He talks about everything that we did last week and talked about last week, how they were separated, when they were separated, property settlement agreement, the marital settlement agreement. He talks about how much that Priscilla had agreed to and Elvis had agreed to, and why he feels like that was not in her best interest. And we'll see as she gives her statements here in just a little bit that I will read, why he feels like that it was unfair. His argument basically was this, that California is a community property state, and that all of the properties that were owned by Elvis were also half hers, that his assets were half hers, and that the settlement was unfair to her. So I'm going to read to you this very last part of what he filed because I think it's interesting. The moving party is entitled to relief from the default taken against her. Although more than 6 months have passed since the entry of the default in this matter, the equitable powers of this court to relieve a party from the burden of an extrinsic fraud are invoked by this motion. Clearly, a fraud has been perpetrated upon Mrs. Presley to her damage. Mrs. Presley was unaware and unadvised of her rights. She dealt with her husband in his fiduciary capacity and believed his representations to her. At no time was a full disclosure of the assets of the community made to her, but rather Mrs. Presley was discouraged from investigating further into the nature of the community property. She refrained from doing so on reliance upon the statements made by her husband. As a result of her belief that the agreements were fair, she failed to respond to the complaint of Mr. Presley for dissolution of their marriage, and a default was entered against her. That default will prevent her from protecting and defending her rights in the marital property. Did y'all catch that? The default will prevent her from protecting and defending her rights in the marital property. So what that says to me is this, and if I'm wrong, and some of you are lawyers or no, but what that says to me is that if she wants that default removed, otherwise she has no recourse to come back and sue him for additional money. She at no time would have allowed the default to be taken had she known the true situation regarding her rights in the community property, nor would she have accepted the property settlement agreement or the marital settlement agreement. However, the truth was concealed from her, or at best, not disclosed to her. By this lack of disclosure, an extrinsic fraud has been committed upon Mrs. Presley, and she is thereby entitled to relief from the default taken against her, so that she might have her day in court to fully and fairly examine and litigate her rights in the community property. So, what she's saying, what Arthur Toll is saying, is that Elvis took advantage of her, he and his attorney, and that she was not treated fairly, and she certainly did not get everything that she deserved to have. That's according to them. Okay, so let's get into this declaration of Priscilla Ann Presley and what all she has to say. Now, there is a lot of reading in here. I will try to break in from time to time and talk a little bit about what I think about it. But because there is so much reading, there may not be as many break-in moments as I would like. So just bear with me, because I think y'all are going to find this unbelievably interesting. Priscilla Ann Presley declares, "I am the respondent in the above matter. I request that the court vacate the default entered against me, so that I may appear before the court and obtain a division of our community property with spousal support and child support according to law. I permitted the default," this is her reasoning, "I permitted the default to be entered against me because I had signed a property settlement agreement and a spousal support agreement, which I was told at the time were fair. At the time that I signed those agreements, I did not know the nature of value of the assets owned by my husband, and nor did I know that I was entitled to one half of them." Okay, y'all remember what I said last week? California is a community property state. Tennessee is not. Where was Elvis's primary domicile? Tennessee. That's where all of the that was the address for all the tax returns. That was the address for everything he did. The registration of his cars, etc. Except for the ones that Priscilla got. And those were registered in California. Okay. She goes on to say that since she was 16 years old, I have been living with my husband's family, and during that time, I developed trust and confidence in my husband, his father, and other persons associated with them. My husband and I were married in Las Vegas, Nevada on May 1st, 1967, when I was 21 years old. During our marriage, I was never involved in my husband's business or financial affairs. I was never informed of my husband's income, nor the nature and amount of property which we had accumulated. My expenses were paid through an unlimited checking account upon which I wrote checks. That needs to be read again. My expenses were paid through an unlimited checking account upon which I wrote checks. Deposits into that account were made by my husband's business managers. Although I signed federal income returns, I never examined the returns and do not know what income was disclosed by them. Okay, so she's saying, I know nothing, is what she's saying, basically. You know, I had money deposited in my account. I have no idea. I don't know anything. You know, this is no idea how much he made, what he owned, all of that. But as we will see, when we get to when she is being asked by the attorney, her deposition, we're going to find out exactly how much she knew and how much of this is truth. Okay, so this is what she is declaring to her attorney, Arthur Toll. Okay, don't forget that. My husband and I separated in February of 1972. In August of 72, my husband told me that we should agree on a division of our property. Sometime around the middle of August 1972, my husband came over to my house in order to discuss the matter. My husband stated to me that he felt the sum of $100,000 would be a proper amount for me to get. My husband also agreed to pay for furniture for my new apartment and to pay the rent for that apartment. He did not tell me how much money or other property we had. He asked me to make my decision then, and I told him that I would accept the $100,000 because I assumed it was fair. Let's go back to that. He didn't tell her how much money or property they had. Yet she had to know she had an unlimited checking account, so there had to be substantial money, right? And she also had to know what properties they owned because she also signed as, you know, the spouse on those properties, at least 2 houses, the one in Chino Hills and the other one on Monteville Drive. Not only that, she purchased all the furnishings for them. So she had to have some idea, okay? So that doesn't sound right to me, what she just said. Okay, so we get to it, said, on that same day, a short time after our discussion, our family attorney, E. Gregory Hookstratton, came to our house. He had been called by my husband to help us in completing the agreement. When Mr. Hookstratton came into the room, my husband told him that he had agreed to give me $100,000. Although I do not recall exactly what Mr. Hookstratton said at that time, I got the impression that he believed it was a fair and proper amount for me to receive as my share of the community property. Okay, let's talk about that for a second. $100,000 in 1973, do you know what that would be equal to in today's money? $737,839.71. That's what that is. That's close to $1 million. That's what he agreed to give her. Okay? So let's be clear on that. She says that Mr. Hookstratton stated that in addition to the property settlement, the law required my husband to give me some amount as spousal support and child support. They both asked me how much money I was spending each month for living expenses, and I quickly wrote some numbers down on a piece of paper. I do not remember the total, but my husband and Mr. Hookstratton suggested I be given $1,000 a month for myself and $500 a month for my daughter. Okay. My husband also assured me that in spite of the property settlement agreement, if I needed additional money, he would always take care of me. Mr. Hookstratton told me that he would draw up the papers and call me when they were ready. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. $1,000 a month for Priscilla in today's money is $6,946.33. $500 a month for Lisa in today's money would be $3,473.17, for a total a month of $10,419.49. That's how much she would be getting. So total yearly of the two combined was $125,034. Let's talk about what the median household income was for back in 1973. Y'all ready? $10,500 a year. A year. Elvis was giving her okay, wait. I said this wrong, y'all. I said this wrong. That is in today's money. Elvis was giving her $18,000 yearly. Okay, let's get this straight because I just went completely off the rails. What it would be in today's money is $125,034. So, have we got that clear? Okay. For back then, it would have been $18,000 a year. But the median household income was $10,500 yearly. So she was getting above and beyond what the median income was. Now, if what I think happened, because it says that he was going to pay for her apartment, which was $700 a month, he was also going to furnish that apartment. I'm taking it that $1,000 a month was above and beyond what he was already paying for. I don't know for sure, but from how it reads to me, it says my husband also agreed to pay for furniture for my new apartment and to pay the rent for that apartment. So he was going to pay for that, and then he was going to give her $1,000 a month. That's how I see it. A few days later, I was called by Mr. Hookstratton and asked to come to his office to sign the papers. When I got to his office, he had the papers prepared, and he told me that it was necessary for a lawyer other than him to look at the papers for me. He told me he had made arrangements with Mr. Robert Brock, whose offices were in the same building, and that he would take me there. Mr. Hookstratton told me Mr. Brock might ask me about my husband's finances and start to discuss money with me, but he told me that if this happened, I should not pay attention to what Mr. Brock said regarding money and tell Mr. Brock that Mr. Hookstratton had fully informed me about finances and that I did not need his help concerning that subject. Mr. Hookstratton took me to Mr. Brock's office and left me there. I waited a few minutes for Mr. Brock, and then he came in. He already had a copy of an agreement in his hand, which he had apparently obtained from Mr. Hookstratton. He asked me if I knew what the paper meant. I told him that I did. He then asked me if I knew how much money my husband received as residuals, royalties, and other income. In accordance with Mr. Hookstratton's instructions, I told him that Mr. Hookstratton had informed me about all of these matters and that I was fully aware of my husband's finances. Mr. Brock then asked me to sign a letter to him stating that I had not employed him for the purpose of advising me about my husband's assets or income. I signed the letter, a copy of which is attached hereto and marked Exhibit A. Okay, we're going to get into later. Mr. Brock has to give a deposition. We're going to get to that next week, and you will hear what he has to say on the matter. I was in Mr. Brock's office for about 15 minutes. I then signed the property settlement agreement believing that I was getting my fair share of our property and believing that in any event I would be taken care of by my husband in the future as I had in the past. I left Mr. Brock's office and went back to Mr. Hookstratton's office. On that day, I signed another document, a marital settlement agreement. But I do not remember whether it was signed in Mr. Brock's office or Mr. Hookstratton's office. I was not given any copies of either of the agreements which I signed, which is a common theme with her. Always saying, I didn't see them. I wasn't given. So, it makes you wonder. I believe all copies were left in Mr. Hookstratton's office in order for my husband to sign them. I was never sent a copy of either agreement by anybody. I never saw a copy of the agreement signed by my husband, nor was I told that he signed either of them. I had no further discussions with my husband regarding our financial agreements or the arrangements, according to her. So a few days later, I was called back to Mr. Hookstratton's office concerning some papers regarding the dissolution of my marriage. I came there late in the afternoon, was given some papers, and left shortly thereafter. A few days later, I received a check for $50,000. I was told by Mr. Hookstratton that I should put that money in the bank and leave it there so that I could have it for my future needs. I deposited the money in Glendale Federal Savings and Loan in Mr. Hookstratton's building. After that, I began receiving $750 twice a month. This money is not enough for me to live on, and on several occasions I called Mr. Hookstratton asking him for money, which I needed for my new apartment. Mr. Hookstratton would often tell me that he would take care of getting me some other money, but I never received it. On several occasions, I called Mr. Vernon Presley, my husband's father and business manager. He would send me checks for furnishing my apartment, but such checks did not provide funds for our other living expenses. So it sounds to me like he was saying, I'll send you checks for the furniture you want to buy. So the apartment must have been being paid for by Elvis, because there's no eviction notices or anything that she states she was sent. Or was she dipping into the $50,000 to pay for that? I don't think so. I may be wrong, but it sounds to me like she was asking for more money. On May 2nd, 1973, I consulted the firm of Tankle, Toole, and Levitt regarding my financial problems. They advised me that under California law, I am entitled to 1/2 of the community property, plus appropriate spousal support and child support. I was not able to give them any idea as to how much community property existed, nor could I tell them my husband's income. They obtained copies of the property settlement agreement from Mr. Brock and Mr. Hookstratton, and a copy of the marital settlement agreement from Mr. Hookstratton. They pointed out to me that the property settlement agreement gives more than 1/2 of the property listed in the agreement to my husband. In addition, it appears that there are a number of very valuable assets which are not listed in the property settlement agreement. I signed the property settlement agreement. I signed the property settlement agreement because both my husband and Mr. Hookstratton told me that it was fair and represented what I was entitled to. In addition, I was told that I would always be taken care of by my husband. I now find that the amount that I agreed to accept is not a fair amount, and is apparently much less than the law would give me. My daughter and I cannot live on $1,500 a month in the style in which we lived during our marriage. Well, I guess not. I have been unable to pay all of our bills out of the monthly support payments, and I have been forced to use some of the $50,000 which I had hoped to save for future emergencies. Okay. I am attempting to arrange my affairs so that I can be gainfully occupied and yet have time to take care of our daughter. I believe I can be successful in designing and selling women's apparel, and I have gone into that business. Okay, yes, she did. And I found there is a book that is for sale by Olivia Biss, and the name of their store was Biss and Bow. And they signed the documents for the partnership agreement on January 12th of 1973. By 1974, they were so successful that they had moved their location to Beverly Hills. Okay, so my question is, was she not getting any money from Biss and Bow? I mean, this is what she was going to do to try to bring income in for herself. Where was the money from that? She didn't disclose any of it. Was there any? You would think so, because Olivia Biss had already established her business, and Priscilla was just coming in as a partner. But listen to what she says. This part just cracks me up. She says, I believe I can be successful in designing and selling women's apparel, and I've gone into that business. It is essential not only that I have enough money to dress in a manner consistent with one who is designing women's clothes. It is essential that I have some money in order to get this business started, and that I have enough money to dress in a manner consistent with one who is designing women's clothes. Okay, I've got something else I'm going to read to y'all here in just a minute. Had I known that I was entitled to 1/2 of the community property and adequate spousal support based upon my husband's income and our previous style of living, and had I known that the sum of $100,000 as my share of the property and $1,000 a month support and $1,000 a month support was not fair, I would not have signed the property settlement agreement or the marital settlement agreement, nor would I have permitted the default to be entered against me. On May 7th, 1973, Mr. Vernon Presley called me and requested a conference concerning our financial differences. I attended the conference with Mr. Vernon Presley, my husband's attorneys, and my attorney on May 10th, 1973. At that meeting, we were unable to resolve our differences. On May 11th, 1973, my husband was performing in Lake Tahoe. Not having been able to resolve anything with his father or his lawyer, I intended to file a motion to set aside the default entered against me, and wanted to be certain that my husband was advised of it before he read it in the papers. How very nice of her. On that occasion, I talked to Mr. Vernon Presley, who was in Lake Tahoe, who advised me that he had not informed my husband of my intentions. Mr. Vernon Presley told me that my husband's engagement in Lake Tahoe would be over on May 20th, 1973, and asked me to wait until then before informing him or filing anything because he was certain that the subject would upset my husband and make it difficult, if not impossible, for him to complete his engagement. I told Mr. Presley I would be willing to wait until then if my lawyer told me that I would not prejudice my rights by doing so. My lawyer told me he would call Mr. Hookstratton, and if Mr. Hookstratton agreed to stipulate that the delay was at my husband's request, I would wait until his engagement was over. My lawyer talked to Mr. Hookstratton on May 14th, 1973, and Mr. Hookstratton joined in the request that we wait until the Lake Tahoe engagement was over. On Sunday, May 20th, 1973, I called my husband, who had gone from Lake Tahoe to Memphis, Tennessee, and told him that I wanted the property settlement agreement and support agreement set aside. He told me that he would see that I got more money, but would not agree to anything definite. He stated that his father would come to California the next day for the purpose of further negotiations. Mr. Vernon Presley came to California on Monday, May 21st, 1973, and another conference was held with Mr. Vernon Presley, Mr. Hookstratton, my attorney, and me. At that meeting, Mr. Presley agreed to send copies of all income tax returns my husband and I had filed. My attorney requested that Mr. Hookstratton set aside the default, and Mr. Hookstratton requested we wait until the income tax returns were received. My attorney stated that we would wait for a few days, but unless Mr. Hookstratton agreed to set aside the default by the end of the week, we would not prejudice ourselves by waiting any longer. She goes on to say that she was filing it on Friday afternoon, May 25th, 1973, and it's signed Priscilla Ann Presley. Just a couple of things I want to get into. She talks about the fact that Lisa's, about the child support payments and that he was only paying $500 a month. That's not entirely correct. In addition to child support, Elvis was paying Lisa's medical insurance. The only thing it says is that Priscilla, this is in the marital termination agreement, so I'm not making any of this up. It says that the wife agrees to pay for anything not covered by the said policy. But then it says, but husband agrees to pay all extraordinary medical bills not covered by insurance and to indemnify wife and hold her harmless therefrom. So what is she paying for? You know, any comments? Put them down below. As additional child support, husband agrees to pay any and all tuition and incidental expenses incurred by wife and or the minor child for Lisa's education, and that included putting her in private school, grammar school, junior high, college. So I would think that would also include childcare, right? And as additional child support, Elvis was to secure a $100,000 life insurance policy that he could not cash in or borrow on. That was supposed to be in addition to the child support. So that's not all that it was. And also, as part of the marital termination agreement, the payment of community obligations, any debts that Priscilla and Elvis had at the time that the original agreements were signed, Elvis was not passing on to her. He was paying for the credit cards and anything that she had accumulated during their marriage. Any debt, he was going to take care of it. That included the payments on the houses that they had purchased and she had signed her name to. So think about that for a little bit. So he wasn't going to let her go into this with any debt whatsoever, and he was paying for so many things. So one thing we know for sure is that Priscilla didn't stop using Elvis's credit cards when they separated. She was still using them up to this. She was still using them even after they divorced, according to Becky Yancey's book. This is Becky's book. I don't know if you can see. And I want to read you what Priscilla says her monthly expenses are, okay? And I'm kind of confused on this. And again, y'all, I'm sorry this is going a little long. I'll wrap it up here in just a minute. The rent, she lists everything separately. Rent or mortgage on her residence, $700. I thought Elvis was paying for that. So should she be listing that as an expense? Property insurance and taxes on home, $100 a month. Maintenance of residence, $500. And I question that too. I question the maintenance, and I question, well, not the insurance, but the maintenance I do. Because if it's an apartment, I'm not sure what maintenance she would have. Food and household supplies, $1,000. Utilities, $150. And I'm going to reiterate again, these are all monthly expenses. Telephone, $400. Laundry and cleaning, $300. Clothing, this one made me choke, $2,500 a month. A month! Medical, $200. Insurance, life, health, etc., $300. Childcare, $500, which I think is covered under Elvis paying for the schooling and all of those things. School, $300. We know that was covered, right? Entertainment, $500. Incidentals, $1,500 a month. Transportation, $1,000 a month. Transportation for what? You had 3 cars. 3 cars that Elvis bought and paid for and gave you title to, along with a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. What transportation costs could you possibly have had? Why would you be a cab? They didn't have Uber back then. I don't know. Auto expenses, gas, repair, etc., $500. So obviously she is driving the cars. Installment payments, $1,350 a month. So these must be credit cards and things that she took out in her name, in addition to the ones that she's still charging on that belong to Elvis. Okay, these are opinions according to Rhonda. Y'all just remember that. Explaining the installment payments, according to Becky, Priscilla listed creditors and balances for clothing purchases. She also claimed outstanding business expenses of $2,000 and furniture and furnishing costs of $1,000 for a total of $14,900 a month. A month. When the median income for an average person in America was a little over $10,000 a year. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable to me. I mean, that is so much money. So much money. We're going to get into more of this next week. This video, like I said, has gone a little longer than normal, but I hope you've enjoyed it. And remember, y'all, you only get one shot at this life. Live each day to the fullest because you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. Bye, everybody. See you next week.